Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy March. Happy Social Work Month. Happy spring. We're so glad you're with us this evening. We're going to begin in just a moment. We're so happy to have Dr. Supiano here. I will introduce her more formally in just a moment. But as you're coming in, we welcome you. My name is Pam Edgar. I'm the Director of Education at CaringKind. And we're going to just share a little bit about CaringKind for those of you who are not familiar. We are one of the country's oldest not-for-profit charities focused on providing care and support for families impacted by Alzheimer's and other dementias. Throughout our 45-plus year history, we have been one of the leading community-based organizations in the field, and we continue to innovate and launch new evidence-based programs. We are based in New York and have a national reach through virtual programs, services, and educational offerings. At CaringKind, we serve the full spectrum of individuals, families, businesses, communities that are touched by Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. We deliver programs and services virtually and in person through one-on-one sessions, small group programs, education webinars, trainings, and special events. We also have a series of professional development webinars that we are proud to launch through the Hearst Foundations grant. So you can see here a quick overview of the types of programs we provide. A few to highlight: we have a helpline, a navigation and consultation services, education workshops, skill building and support groups. We also have a comprehensive suite of early stage programs. We also provide workforce and dementia-friendly trainings. We are working to advance our field through research initiatives and monthly professional development programs like the one you're at today. And we have specialized services in multiple languages and for those in particular cultural communities and other affinity groups. And thanks to our donors, supporters, and tireless fundraising efforts each year, we continue to offer our services free of charge to individuals and families. We also want to let you know that we are intentionally collaborating with social service researchers, healthcare professionals, in an attempt to provide a network of support for the individuals and families we all serve. So if you're working directly with people who could benefit from our free programs and services, we want you to know that you can provide a direct referral to our team through an electronic form on our website. There's also a PDF version you can download and email or fax to us if that's better for you. And we have the QR code here, and we'll also put the information in the chat in a little bit for you as well. Here we are. So we're going to get started in just a moment. We welcome you to put questions in the chat throughout our conversation today. This is being recorded and it will be posted on our education hub on our website. So we'll save the questions to the end, but you can add them in the chat at any time. And after Dr. Supiano finishes her presentation, we'll have a chance for questions and answers. And at that time, you can come on video, you can unmute yourself and ask questions or ask questions in the chat. And we're currently in focus mode, but we will go back into gallery mode so everyone can see each other for that time. So again, welcome to Grief Guideposts, navigating family caregivers across the dementia continuum toward constructive grief. My name is Pam Edgar. I'm the Director of Education at CaringKind. And we are so thrilled to welcome our special guest speaker today, Dr. Cathie Supiano. Dr. Supiano is a professor in the College of Nursing and the director of Caring Connections, a hope and comfort in grief program at the University of Utah College of Nursing. She has been a practicing clinical social worker and psychotherapist for over 40 years. Her clinical practice has included care of older adults with depression and multiple chronic health concerns, end-of-life care and bereavement care. Dr. Supiano's research is in clinical interventions in complicated grief, prevention of adverse grief outcomes, suicide survivorship, overdose grief, and prison hospice. Dr. Supiano is a fellow in the Gerontological Society of America and a fellow of thanatology. Welcome, Cathie. We're so thrilled that you're here with us today.
Well, thank you, Pamela, and thank you to my friends at CaringKind, many of whom I've had the good occasion to get to know. And happy Social Work Month to those of you who are social workers out there. It is truly a pleasure to be with you at this time. So I'm going to just jump right into what we're talking about. I'd like to frame this in the context of one of the largest risk factors that dementia family caregivers have, that being isolation. And we really want to talk about ways that we can address this and navigate people in their caregiving journey toward an eventual grief that they can feel was satisfying, if not challenging. And certainly we know it's challenging, but we can, as we say on our team, help people have a softer landing. So thank you for inviting me. Our research has been funded through two successive grants from the Alzheimer's Association, and our current work is funded by the Timmy and Dick Burton Foundation. So I'd like to frame this just starting in my generation with this thought from Lennon and McCartney's Eleanor Rigby. All the lonely people, where do they all come from? All the lonely people, where do they all belong? So how does loneliness and isolation play into this story of long dementia family caregiving? What we want to talk about first, I think, is the background of social isolation and associated loneliness. And these are not uniform concepts, but are related. So according to the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, prior to the pandemic, a third of adults age 45 and older described feeling lonely. And loneliness is a feeling of being alone. It is a subjective experience. Fully a quarter of older adults are considered socially isolated, a number that has increased since the pandemic. But social isolation is an objective situation. It is a lack of social connections, a much higher risk in late life than in earlier phases of life. So let's think about how these concepts are related. When we think about social connection, this ability to connect and to have meaningful connections with people, risk factors, living alone, already being bereaved, already having perhaps some declining health, health impacts that may make mobility, social mobility, somewhat limited, and other mediators like sleep problems, stress, negative appraisals of self and others. All of these can conspire to lead to increased mortality. So how do we prevent this cycle? Well, prior to the pandemic, we had social and situational actions. We would advocate for healthcare and self and mental health care. We would have mechanisms to address the natural losses of life, widowhood, death of family and friends, which is normative over the course of the lifespan, by growing additional human relationships progressively. This is why it's wise for older adults to have friendships with younger people, just saying. Shared stimulating activities that are both social and intellectually engaging, proactive support for family care partners. This one I highlight because this is an essential part of the work of CaringKind, and we commend you for that. And helping older adults realize the value of interdependency above and beyond the understandable value of personal independence. So let's now explore a little bit the relationship between dementia, social isolation, and loneliness. So in this little image, when we're thinking of the person living with dementia, PLWD, and their family caregivers or care partners, CP, you could jump into this circle at any moment, but we'll start with cognitive impairment. When we have a person caring for a person with cognitive impairment, because of the very realistic and understandable burden of caring for a person with cognitive impairment, that caregiver and the person living with dementia can experience a progressive and almost undiscernible start of social withdrawal. This can lead to increasing isolation and loneliness, not only with the person living with dementia, but the care partner. This can result in lower social stimulation, which can lead to an acceleration of cognitive impairment in the person living with dementia and a heightened risk for cognitive impairment in the care partner. So let's look at these risk factors. Social isolation significantly increased a risk of an individual's premature death from all causes. And social isolation is a mortality risk that rivals smoking, obesity, and physical inactivity. This we knew before the pandemic. Poor social relationships are associated with almost a 30% increase in heart disease and a 30% increase in the risk of stroke. And this is very, very concerning. Loneliness is associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. So even when people don't experience higher morbidity and mortality, their quality of life can really be impaired. Loneliness among heart failure patients, a very common disease in later life, was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death, an increased risk in hospitalization, and a much higher risk of ED visits. But it's important to know that social isolation is also associated with about a 50% increased risk of dementia. So we know that social isolation is dangerous in people who have dementia, but it is also dangerous in people who are caregivers of people with dementia. So we do have structural solutions for this. Neighborhoods, congregate living settings, and equals community. People who move into congregate settings, congregate living settings, or are embedded in intact caring communities do well on the issues of social isolation and potential loneliness. People who participate in supported activities, these can include OSHER centers, education centers, lifelong learning programs, and senior centers that offer a variety of health promoting programs and social engagement programs. These are really important mitigating structures. And as the dementia progresses, formal supports can come into play. And I want to particularly give a shout out to adult day centers, which do so much to promote socialization in people living with dementia, but also to give freedom, a break, and an opportunity for other external socialization for family care partners. Family support programs like advanced care planning, engaging in family and cultural rituals, and caregiver education are vital to supporting caregivers and to prevent the harms of social isolation and resultant loneliness. There are also institutional solutions to addressing this. As the person living with dementia progresses in the dementia trajectory, assisted living may become appropriate, specific memory care units can become appropriate. Eventually, many people do need long-term care facilities, supported facilities, but at each one of these institutional steps, family and caregiver community engagement continues to be essential. And by that, I mean the family caregiver needs to engage in the community. But if you're working in assisted living, memory care, or long-term care, it's essential for the person living with dementia that the community comes into the institutional setting. Support for families across these settings is continual because the caregiving challenges are different at each stage of the dementia caregiving trajectory. This is what's involved in routine, but I would say excellent caregiver support. These are the basics, and this is just the basics. But excellent caregiver support programs always include these components. First of all, psychoeducation, understanding the disease, not just what's happening now, but what's coming around the corner. Peer support is vital, and this is one thing where we need to recognize that giving people information over a website is important, but insufficient. People need the opportunity to talk with other caregivers, and as our caregivers tell us, learn the tricks of the trade. Research information is vital, and this is essential that professionals are involved in this because resources, especially now, are changing from day to day as funding becomes more mercurial and less predictable. Caregivers need role models to demonstrate how to take a break. And if family care partners get these 4 things, for most of them, this is actually sufficient for them to navigate the caregiving journey. Now, for many, it's not sufficient, and we'll talk about those differences. But every excellent caregiver support program needs to include these components at the minimum. Now, I'm just going to share a little slide, a couple little slides that we use when we go out, as your team at CaringKind often does, and give presentations in the community to family caregivers. First, it's always challenging to get them there and to have them take a whole day to learn things. We always offer opportunities when we partner with community organizations. So the person living with dementia has care, structure, and activity during the day when we're doing an educational, a psychoeducational support program for family caregivers. These are some of the key points that we transmit to family caregivers. How do you find that balance? First, I always like to start with this quote. This is very dear to my heart. This is from the beautiful play Cyrano de Bergerac. And if you remember in this play, beautiful Roxanne thinks she has fallen in love with handsome Christian, the musketeer. And Christian is clumsy and awkward and frankly not very bright. And he turns to Cyrano, you see pictured here, who's ugly, and asks him to write love poems. So Roxanne hears these beautiful love poems and thinks she's in love with handsome Christian, who dies in a sword fight. Afterwards, Cyrano is mortally wounded, and he turns to Roxanne and recites some of the poetry that he created for Christian. Roxanne realizes that all this time she has been in love with Cyrano and not with the now departed Christian. And she gives this beautiful quote, which echoes what we often hear from family caregivers once the person living with dementia has died. I have loved but one man in my life, and I have lost him twice. That is one of the distinctive features of being a family caregiver at the very end of the life of the person living with dementia. Much of the personality, but certainly not all of the personality, but much of the personality of the person with dementia has now evaporated as a consequence of disease progression. And later, the body dies. And many bereaved dementia family caregivers tell us that they have actually experienced two deaths. Some describe three deaths: when he couldn't remember or recognize me anymore, the day I had to place him in a nursing home, and then the day he eventually died. So you can see this is a much more convoluted and complicated grief journey than, and not that dying, losing someone to cancer is not horrible, or losing someone to heart disease is not horrible, but the opportunity to say goodbye is highly compromised in the grief journey of dementia family caregivers. So we always instruct our caregivers, as much as possible, they need to find balance. And they turn to us as we give this wonderful sage advice, and they groan. And they're exactly right. This is not easy. This is not saying to young moms, figure out how to get to yoga class once a week. Most family caregivers are deeply, deeply devoted to the person with dementia. Some are not. Many are caregivers out of nothing more than obligation, but they show up and do the work, and that counts for a lot. But finding balance is a very difficult thing. And I think everyone on this call has heard a family caregiver say, I'm just so frightened to leave him alone or with someone else because no one can take care of him the way I can. And we have no retort to that, because that is absolutely true. And so it takes much more than just telling people you have to take care of yourself. We have to give them the rationale and the tools. Caregiving, and I have to be forthright with you, I too have been a dementia family caregiver. Caregiving is a burden. It can also be a blessing. It can be both of these things, but it is always a journey. By burden, I don't want us to use that word in a guilt inflicting way. When we care for infants and we change diapers or we wake up in the middle of the night, of course, it's a burden. It's a burden. Parents groan and, oh, we're sleep deprived, but they do it joyfully. Most dementia family caregivers do this work day in, day out. The 36-hour day is more than a metaphor, it's a reality, but it's always a journey. Now, I grew up in Michigan. This is how people make a journey in Michigan: beautiful forests in the North Woods, cool pine trees. I grant you a lot of mosquitoes, but the territory is smooth and laid out, very predictable. Now I live in Utah, and this actually reflects a true caregiving journey. It's rocky, it's dangerous. I need to tell you, there are snakes, there are cliffs, there are unpredictable twists and turns, and you'll notice there's not a molecule of shade here. This is actually the dementia caregiving journey. So what do caregivers need? They need to recognize from the time of diagnosis that this is a long game. This is not losing someone to cancer. This is not the last weeks or months of congestive heart failure or COPD. This is caregiving over a decade. And we need to be forthright with our caregivers that they will need skills, and we can teach them skills. And frankly, if you're supporting caregivers, skill education is the easiest part of the game. How to make your house safe, how to dispense medicine, how to feed a person so that they don't slap the spoon out of your face. Those are very, very basic skills. Stamina is a much harder thing to develop and transmit, and particularly with our spouse caregivers who themselves are age peers with their older adult, elder life partners, and could be in their 80s and 90s and trying to do this work. In the long game, caregivers need to know that everything takes so much longer. And something that's very difficult for many spouse caregivers to face is that they need companions on this journey. Sometimes it's their adult children, sometimes it's siblings, sometimes it's paid help, but they are just essentially not going to be able to do this on their own. No one would be able to. I am just, there we go. I think someone might be clicking into the slides a little bit. But now they're progressing. A wonderful term has been developed by the Family Caregiver Alliance that articulates this framework of isolation and its risk for dementia family caregivers. And it's called companioned isolation. You may be working with a caregiver who says, I am not alone. I am always round the clock with the person that I'm caring for, but I feel desperately isolated. I feel desperately alone. So these are people who feel lonely and isolated, even in the presence of the person that they're caring for, because unlike caring for a person dying of cancer, or a person dying of heart disease, there's no longer the same sort of reciprocity in the relationship that existed earlier. So we also use this very same diagram with education to our dementia family care partners so that they understand these risks. It's essential that family caregivers understand that isolation is dangerous for them as well, not only in terms of their own risk for dementia, but also for those negative health outcomes that I described several slides ago. Family caregivers are most typically, again, not always, but the ones we worry about are very self-sacrificing. And so they do not in themselves perceive the warning signs of depletion. And we've seen time and again, and I'm sure your clinical team at CaringKind has seen time and again, when the caregiver is hospitalized or the caregiver is sick or the caregiver dies before the person living with dementia. And so we need to be very forthright in identifying and supporting our family caregivers through these risks. So how to prevent this cycle? Healthcare and self-healthcare. Really meticulous attention to this is vital. To address the natural losses with the provision of actual additional human relationships, not only across the lifespan, but as the dementia progresses. Shared stimulating activities that are both social and intellectually engaging, not just between the caregiver and the person living with dementia, but bringing in other people to provide that stimulation, social and intellectual. Proactive support for our family caregivers. This means professionals working in this area need to anticipate the needs that family caregivers are going to have and educate and provide those resources before we get into a crisis. And again, interdependency. So an example that I often use is if we can get family caregivers to accept household support first and just teach them that an outsider can come into the house and clean or do tasks, that gets both the caregiver and the care receiver used to outside support. And that makes it easier to later introduce a care manager or a social worker or a nurse or hospice or the transition to adult day center. or care facility. So baby steps are important. We also like to advise our caregivers to learn how to balance solitude, which they will have a lot of, and engagement. And this is really where social media can be helpful, but more importantly, social tools like Zoom and FaceTime can be vital to keeping people connected. So now our caregivers ask us, how do we find balance? Now I'd like us to take a 10,000-foot view here, not just the agency serving client view. This is going to take transformative care across the United States. And here I cite Thomas Friedman, who says, to create compassionate communities, the more people are anchored in communities where they feel connected, protected, and respected, the more people are ready to reach out and experiment, the less they feel connected, protected, and respected, the more they'll want to build walls to protect themselves from change. So we want family caregivers to move out into the world freely. We want the world to come to them. And we want our care partners, our family caregivers, to be comfortable taking their people with dementia out into a world that's more compassionate. Just visualize the restaurant, if you will. And these are the components of a healthy community. In a healthy community and a compassionate community, people are connected. They live lives within a safety net of care that supports healthy interrelationships, is characterized by trust, and equips citizens to navigate the wider world. They are respected. We respect people living with dementia. We respect family caregivers. They're listened to, cared for, cared about, and encouraged to share their gifts and talents with each other in the larger world. That happens in support groups. That happens in adult day centers and in senior centers. They're honored for being who they are, not for what they have or what they do or what they lack. And they're protected. In compassionate communities, we protect the young, the old, the suffering. We shield them from harm. And when they are harmed, because dementia is harmful and caregiving is risky, we resource them when that harm happens. This, and I love this image because my father was a woodworker and a carpenter, in addition to being a businessman. This image here is the image of a compassionate community. You can see a builder, a contractor has come into a home to restore it and ripped up the subfloor and has found these old, decrepit boards that need support. But instead of ripping out those boards and judging them and saying, oh, you're not good enough, the wise carpenter comes alongside with beautiful, fresh 2x4s and brackets them to the older board, sustaining that board and making it strong enough to support a new subfloor. When we are the helpers, particularly the professional helpers, we are these boards. We are not ripping out old boards. We're building on them and supporting them. The other thing we emphasize for our family caregivers is that they will not always be a caregiver. For the vast majority of our dementia family caregivers, their life will outdistance the life of the person living with dementia. And we have this as dialogue all the time, how important it is to keep the you of you alive for your post-caregiving journey. And many caregivers are stricken at that concept, especially early in the disease process. And they can hardly imagine a life without the person with dementia. Even people who are very active and engaged caregivers in the hospice phase of dementia have a very hard time recapturing that sense of all the other things they are and were and need to be again after their caregiving journey. So, what is the single best reason that caregivers need to find balance. Well, we can say self-care, we can offer respite care, and you know as well as I do that many people are going to refuse those very vital services. But here's the reason. The person that you're caring for needs you. They need you to be healthy. They need you to be energetic. They need you to be the best you. And the best you deserves replenishment. So I come from a faith tradition that has a lot of guilt in it. And it's important that we flip that and say, be guilty enough to replenish yourself so that you can stay in the long game. All right. One of the things we like to share with all of our caregiving groups is this little caregiver meditation. This was crafted after a gentleman named Rick Lauber of the Canadian Alzheimer's Caregiver Association. And many of our grief groups and our pre-loss groups include this meditation as part of our care. And I'll just read it to you now. And I'm sorry, my voice is a little froggy tonight. I don't have my good mindfulness voice tonight. I cannot control the disease process, but I can control many aspects of how it affects me and my family member. I set my intention to take care of myself so that I continue doing the things that are most important, to simplify my lifestyle so that my time and energy are available for things that are really important, to cultivate the gift of allowing others to help me, because caring for my family member is too big a job to be done by one person, to take one day at a time rather than worrying about what may be or what may not happen in the future, to breathe in and to breathe out, to structure my day because a consistent schedule makes life easier for me and my family member, to retain my sense of humor because laughter helps me put things in a more positive perspective, to remember that my family member is not being difficult on purpose. Rather, their behavior and emotions are distorted by this horrible illness. To focus on and enjoy what my family member can still do rather than constantly lamenting what is gone, and to breathe in and breathe out. To increasingly depend on other relationships for love and support, to remind myself that I'm doing the best that I can at this moment, and to draw on a higher power as best as I understand it. So in our grief groups and in our pre-loss groups, we return to that meditation time and again. So now I'd like to describe a service that we have created, and CaringKind, I'm pleased to say, is one of our implementation sites. But we know that even with those 4 key things that I've identified and I said are essential for agencies that are helping caregivers with persons living with dementia, we know that some people are going to need much more support than psychoeducation, resources, and collegiality. So we've developed a 10-session group facilitated by social workers to prepare family caregivers for the final stages of dementia family caregiving. Remember I said this is a death that has 2 deaths, a death of that person's ability to interact, and later their body dies. And we have found that complicated and difficult grief develops when people did not do the early saying goodbye work when they had the opportunity. And this is part of our design for this program. It was developed by our team at Caring Connections, and at the moment it's being offered in these locations in Utah, Jewish Family Services, our Veterans Administration Caregiver Program, and our geriatric clinic, as well as now being evaluated in these 8 sites around the country. And I'll share some of our research findings as well as this program. So systematic reviews have indicated that a lack of preparedness is the single biggest predictive factor in poor bereavement outcomes. So preparedness is our target goal. And any comprehensive family caregiver support program should include preparation for the death of the person living with dementia. And there are your resources, and I believe Pamela will share all these slides with you. So the background of our intervention. Dementia family caregiving may span more than a decade and places many family care partners at risk for poor bereavement. As many as 20% of family caregivers will, unfortunately, experience prolonged grief, which is called prolonged grief disorder. In the DSM, we're pretty careful in our program not to use the word disorder, but let's explain what we're talking about. Prolonged grief is a state of ineffective mourning associated with functional impairment, high levels of medical morbidity, cognitive impairment, and suicidal ideation. So this is the tragic situation where we see the caregiver spiral down after the death of the person living with dementia. And unlike normal grief, prolonged grief is characterized by unabated maladaptive thoughts, mostly guilt, feelings, and behaviors that obstruct adjustment to the death. So who's at risk for prolonged grief? People who have an inability to accommodate relationship change. These are individuals who treat the person with dementia as though they were unchanged by the disease. People who have a very positive view of the caregiver role, who take that on not just as a part of their identity, but as their full identity. People who perceive that their communication with the person living with dementia is gratifying and satisfying. People who have enormous affection for the person living with dementia. People who have very high caregiving burden, and also may end up with their person needing to be placed in a nursing home. But if you look at these risk factors, I love my husband despite his dementia. I love going to the nursing home every day to talk with him. I want to be there all the time. I show up, I feed him breakfast, I feed him dinner. You will see that from a systems point of view, these are the ideal family members. But we don't think that the very behaviors that make the work in the nursing home much easier, if you have a spouse that comes up and continues to deliver the care, actually places these individuals at risk for a poor bereavement outcome. So our earlier work, and I have our references attached here, has revealed that caregivers who experience the family member's decline as traumatic, and these are people who have been educated about the mid-stage problems of dementia and the end-stage consequences of dementia, but they perceive these as traumatic. They have high expressed concern for losing the role of the caregiver. I don't know what I'm going to do when my wife dies. Who report having insufficient support, and we need to explore that with people. Sometimes these are people who have family, but they may be unwilling, or they may be exhausted, or they may not be meeting the needs of the primary caregiver. People who have difficulties imagining the life without the person with dementia, and report that they are unable to make sense or meaning of the illness or the death or the imminent death. These are our highest risk people. So the purpose of our intervention development project was to develop, implement, and evaluate a theoretically grounded grief support, group support intervention to attenuate the risk of prolonged grief disorder and facilitate constructive and healthy grief in family caregivers. So what's involved in pre-loss group support? So we adapted a model of prolonged grief group therapy for bereaved dementia caregivers and adapted it for those who were soon to be bereaved. And this is following the principles of palliative care, where we want to introduce that level of care earlier and earlier up the disease trajectory. It's a 10-session multimodal therapeutic group intervention for family care partners administered by social workers and other mental health clinicians. So just briefly, our research trajectory, we adapted a post-death grief model for people who were soon to be bereaved of their person living with dementia. We used empirically validated procedures for developing psychosocial interventions, created a manual, and both a participant manual and a facilitator manual. And we evaluated our therapy in 3 psychotherapy cohorts with family members who were high risk for prolonged grief, whose person living with dementia lived in a nursing home and had a life expectancy of 6 months or less. We did this pragmatic trial in 6 nursing homes with trained social workers. That was our pilot study, and we are now in a pragmatic trial with 8 various, and we'll talk about them, agencies serving persons living with dementia and their family care partners. And CaringKind is one of our implementation sites. So the purpose of the first project was to determine if telehealth delivered pre-loss group support reduced complicated grief risk in family care partners when delivered by nursing homes or social workers who are trained via telehealth. So Utah is a very rural state, and we wanted to target at least half our facilities were highly rural. So Utah qualifies not just as a rural state, but as a frontier state. And many of the people who live in Utah have to drive over 150 miles to locate healthcare. We proposed telehealth to address not only the pandemic, our first study was done during the pandemic, but geography. And our first study was to evaluate feasibility and acceptability of this telehealth delivered model. And our current study moves up the disease trajectory, and it's to be preventative. It's to lower the risk for complicated grief much earlier in the dementia disease trajectory. So the theoretical framework, some of you are familiar with this if you're familiar with grief work, the dual process theory by Strobe and Schutt that emphasizes loss-oriented coping and how to build a new life, and meaning reconstruction theory of Niemeyer, which addresses the capability of the grievers to accept loss, realize growth, and create a new identity. This is just a screenshot, and you're just seeing the first 3 of the 10 sessions, just so you know the activities that are there, that there's a very strong theoretical component, multiple therapeutic approaches, and treatment goals at each session. The emphasis is on the relationship between the family care partner and their person living with dementia, how their memories of their life are interpreted, and strategies for creating a life without the person living with dementia. It includes psychoeducation, motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral techniques, prolonged exposure techniques, memory work, mindfulness, self-care, and meaning reconstruction activities. We also invite a support of others selected by the group participant to come for about 10 or 15 minutes in 3 of the 10 sessions. I'm just going to show you, we have an extensive all-day training program for social workers who are learning this intervention. And I'm just going to highlight study 1, which was the nursing home social workers. This was done in 3 veterans homes and 3 nursing homes with sufficient persons living with dementia. 4 were rural and 2 were urban locations. And this is a beautiful picture of Utah. All of these were highly rated nursing homes. Results from our pilot study, our participants realized significant improvement in their risk factors and their self-reported preparedness for the death of their family member. They experience or evidence lower pre-loss grief severity and improvement as measured by the group facilitators. And they also, and this to me is the most satisfying, were able to make sense of this. To make sense by being in a group that they're not the only one who's going through this. They're not the only one who says, I'm not a good enough caregiver. I wish there was more I could do. What am I going to do without him? And realize this as a sense of peace and a reduction in loneliness. Again, our theme for today. Our second study includes, and it's going on right now, 8 agencies located in 6 states across the United States in various settings: adult daycare settings, hospice settings, home health settings, community agencies that are small, very small, and some that are very large. Our interventionists are recruited and enrolled. They get a full day of training. They're provided with manuals. We have supervision over the course of their first group, and we evaluate their treatment fidelity just to make sure they're implementing the group as it is indicated in the manual. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just show and describe some examples of the treatment elements. For those of you who are clinicians, this will resonate with work that you do probably every day if you're a therapist or a counselor, but I just wanted to describe them for you. A key element here is the story of what's coming, and I've got a video clip that'll come a little later that describes the story of what's coming and another treatment element. But in every session, the facilitators talk with the group members about what's coming around the corner. When is it time to plan for hospice? When do I need to entertain telling my children more what's going on? What do you think we could do about writing the obituary now? Things like that, things that are looking at what's coming around the corner. But part of this is also a little bit of a dream aloud, where people say, this is what I hope is going to happen. I want the death to be peaceful. I want to be there at the time of death. I absolutely don't want to be there at the time of death. When people are able to articulate out loud what they long for, even though, of course, we can't promise that they'll get that. People with dementia die of sudden death all the time. They're able to develop a future focus that is actually grounded in the present. Another treatment element is the introduction of supportive others. And this is really important. We want the family caregiver who's in the group to bring in a person that of their choosing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my slides for a moment, and I'm going to go to a video clip, and I'm also going to show you me as the facilitator, starting with my mouth open, which is unpleasant here. But you'll see in part of this video example, and this is a video using trained actors to provide the training. You will see that I think my sharing is not working for the second. I'm just going to try this again. There we go. Now I think you're going to see it. Good. How the support of others can assist in this part of seeing what's coming in the future and what people hope is coming. And this may break in with an ad, I'm afraid, and it does. I'm so sorry.
Hi, my name is
Let's see if I can make this.
and I'm going to be showing you how to make
This
pesto
is
today.
not
That
what
is the
I
tradition-
asked for. Oh, goodness. I just want to make sure I'm getting just the right one for you here. Okay, I am so sorry that that popped off like that. Well, all right, I will instead, I'm sorry, I will tell you what I would have done in that session, and I want to make sure I'm back to my screen. All right.
Yes, you're all set.
Okay. So in this setting, one of the actors plays the son of a mother. And he comes into the group and he says, I'm so glad that you're in the group, Mom, but I need to tell you what I'm really worried about is that you're working harder in the nursing home than you did when Dad was at home. You did a wonderful job, but you come first thing in the morning and you feed him breakfast and you stay through the day and you have lunch with him and you feed him dinner. Even though now he's bedfast, of course, you prop him up and you feed him dinner, and you do that better than anyone else could, but you come home exhausted. And you don't come to our house for Christmas, and you don't come for Sunday dinner, and you are not connected with your friends anymore. And just like Kathie and Laura said in the group, you're not ready for Dad to die. And I'm afraid, Mom, that we're going to lose you more in a more devastating way than we would even lose Dad. And what's striking here is this is a son who might have said this 50 times to his mother, and she reacts and she says, but honey, I love him. I want to do this. And in front of the group, he says, of course you do, but it may not be the best thing. And that's when the other group members chime in and they say to her, Sherry, of course you feel this way. Of course you do this. I see you in the dining room every day. But what are other ways of doing this? And over the course of the group, she decides first she's going to go home before dinner and she's going to spend time going through some of his things and bring mementos in to show him from day to day. And so what could have been an angry family confrontation in the group becomes something more comforting, something where she feels supported, she feels listened to, not just by her son, but by other members of the group who help her come up with some strategies. Every week in this group, people develop preparedness goals and self-care goals and work every week on preparedness goals. So for example, in the first week, they identify the goals that are, what's the hardest thing to do to prepare for the death? Well, for some people, it could be writing an obituary. For some people, that's an easy thing. That's a pleasant thing. That's a joyful thing. And a difficult thing for them may be taking a weekend away from visiting in the care facility and being willing to have another family member come and be with their dad. Self-care goals, you would think preparedness goals are the hardest goals, but self-care goals are by far for group members the hardest goals. And they all say things at the start like, well, I'll just go get a pedicure. Then they come back in the next week and nobody's gotten a pedicure, right? Or they've done a very bad job at home on their own. So they don't get any comfort in outside support. But it's important to know the facilitators don't prescribe the self-care goals. These have to come, as the preparedness goals do, from the person in the group. They have to come up with those. And while we are very soft on achieving preparedness goals, we're pretty strident on self-care goals and invite the rest of the group to hold each person accountable for these self-care goals. We often ask them to identify how distressing their preparedness goal for the week is. And then we do, and I apologize again, our video clip is not working, though I'm always happy to share these materials. But by far the most challenging component of the intervention, and this happens in the 8th week of the intervention, is when our our group participants, our family caregivers, have an imaginal conversation with their person living with dementia, but not as they are in the present moment, as they were earlier in their life when they could have actually had a conversation about dying and what that would have been like. And if you're familiar with the two-chair technique, or it used to be called an empty chair technique, we actually use this treatment element as the facilitator and the participant alternate roles. So first, the participant says all the things they would want to say to the person living with dementia if they had the capacity to hear and understand and respond. And then they change chairs with one of the group facilitators, who then portrays the group member, the family caregiver, and the family caregiver responds in the voice of the person living with dementia. Now, this is very evocative. So for family caregivers who love their person with dementia, the devoted wife, the very loving son, for example, these are tearful and warm and saying, Dad, if I just had one more time, I could tell you how much I loved you. And this is how the kids and I made the decision to bring in hospice. And we want you to know we think this is what you would have chosen. And then they go back and forth on that. These are very evocative and tearful. And believe me, the whole group is crying. But these are also very evocative when we have the family caregiver who has a relationship of strife with the person living with dementia. And very often this could be a family caregiver who has now gotten through the difficult behavior stage of dementia, where the person living with dementia could have been combative or paranoid or accusatory or inordinately demanding or wandering all night long. Behaviors that it's very hard not to take personally. Or they might have had a fraught relationship for their whole relationship. And the example that's in the training video is a daughter who felt unloved by her mother, who now is in a care facility with FTD. And her father was the loving caregiver, but then he dies. And she is left now to care for this mother that she can hardly tolerate. And how does she do that? So that conversation reflects another complicating form of grief, where people are grieving not what they've lost, but they're grieving what they never had. And these are very poignant. But to have these conversations before the death actually happens makes that grief experience after the death much softer. We also do a lot of memory integration work over the course of the weeks. In week 4, the group members do a lot of homework where they identify their family members' most likable characteristics. And again, this is just a screenshot of the whole worksheet. Enjoyable memories, the things they loved most. In another week, they remember difficult memories. Now, this is really challenging because even people who had the most loving and continue to have a very loving relationship with their person with dementia, they also have bad memories. They have memories of that argument that might have happened shortly after they were married. They may have difficult memories of losing a child early in their marriage. They may have difficult memories of a father who was otherwise lovely, but might have gone through a period of substance use, misuse. And so it's important when we have the opportunity to process those difficult memories before the death, just as it is important to identify and really archive those pleasant memories. And we tell people that after the death comes, those difficult memories are going to bubble up again. And you are going to be so much more comfortable if you've archived your pleasant memories to use them as tools to navigate difficult memories. Because no matter what relationship we have both pleasant and unpleasant memories of all the people we have intimate relationships with. And then in week 9, we spend a lot of time integrating those memories so that people can, as they prepare for the death of the person with dementia, develop what we know is essential in continuing bonds with our memories of a person who's died, having a realistic memory of the person who died. We know that the people who can't stand the person who died have a difficult grief if they were supposed to love that person or be loved by that person. But we also know that people who put a dead person on a pedestal, they don't have a very good grief either. And so to have a healthy continuing bond with a person who is now dead, we need a very realistic picture of them. So for those of you out there, and once again, happy Social Work Month, everyone. The clinical takeaways here for all of us are dementia caregiving is a long haul. It is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and all of these steps along the way, while maybe satisfying for people who say, well, I did that well, are so tiring and so challenging and are changing constantly that many family caregivers are at risk for a poor bereavement outcome. And to me, that's a deep, deep tragedy that a person can be a caregiver for a decade and their person with dementia dies and they're fraught with guilt or wonder, did I do enough? Could I have done more? It's just so sad when people should be free to say, that was hard, that was challenging, but I'm really proud of what I was able to do. Prolonged grief nationwide across all forms of grief remains under-recognized and underdiagnosed and undertreated. Very few efforts have been identified to address prevention of prolonged grief. And as Pamela said when she introduced me, we do a lot of work with overdose grief at Caring Connections. We do a lot of work with suicide grief, and those are deaths people can't prepare for. Dementia is a death that people can prepare for. We can help people have better grief outcomes. Our series of studies are the first known application of therapeutic strategies to address prolonged grief before the death of the person living with dementia. It brings additional advantages done in a group format. It addresses, and again, where did we start tonight? Social isolation, so common among long-term family care partners. The results of this study support the need for further research to develop preventative treatment for family care partners at risk. So my invitation to you, all my colleagues out there in Griefland, is this, and this beautiful quote from the Talmud: do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, because truly we cannot take grief away, nor should we, but neither are we free to abandon it. So I gave you one little glimpse of Utah, but I know most of you are on the East Coast right now and it's dinner time. What you see in this picture, this beautiful photograph taken by one of my colleagues, who's a neuroscientist, Jason Shepard. This is the Spiral Jetty. This is a man-made, beautiful artwork about a football field long in the northernmost section of the Great Salt Lake. And to me, this is the beauty of human creation. But above it is the Milky Way, which I get to see, and you people in New York do not get to see very often, but I get to see this on every clear night. But the effort that we put in as our creative clinical selves, combining with the created ability of human beings to grieve and to go on in life after losing something absolutely precious, this is really, to me, the image of therapy. So here are all my references, just so you know that's the real deal. I'm delighted, and maybe as we're chatting, Pamela, I can tee up that video again, but it queued out on me, and I'm so sorry. But I hope you know we're very happy to share these resources for social workers out there and other clinicians who are interested in learning this treatment approach. Turn to your colleagues at CaringKind. They'll share their opinions of it. But we welcome people as future trainees with us, and we're just delighted to share this with you. And I am just going to give one final shout out to CaringKind, who we in the West look to the East, and we see you as an exemplary example of comprehensive dementia care support programs. So it's just a thrill to partner with you. I'm happy to take any questions now if that's our next order of business.
Well, thank you so much for that, Kathie. And I just want to share that we're hearing really powerful stories and reports from the pilot group that's happening now, that pre-loss group. So thank you so much for partnering with us on it. Want to invite people to raise their hand as Shira did, and or put questions in the chat, whichever you're more comfortable with. Shira, please come off mute and ask your question. There you are.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. Kathie, it is a real privilege to hear you speak again. Your insights and the way you lay it out just makes so much sense. You talk about the ability to repair relationships while somebody is still alive, and I feel like that's probably the most tremendous gift that we could give anybody. So I'm really hopeful that that is coming true for a bunch of people. I do have two people in a support group right now who are also participating in the pre-loss session experience, and they each have clearly benefited tremendously from the experience. So I can just speak to it firsthand and say that I think it is really helping them. An interesting comment that was raised today that I wanted to kind of get your feedback on was this idea that there's often a concern that someone with dementia might continue to persist and live for years well beyond the time that their quality of life seems to be all that meaningful, at least to the person who's the care partner looking in and remembering, sort of comparing to what that person had been like. And now I find myself in a situation where I have care partners who've said, and even though I felt that way forever, now death is imminent. And now I find myself with all these new emotions and fears and concerns that I couldn't imagine. And they spoke to things such as changes in roles. So I was curious if you could speak a little bit to how to manage that change, that shift of being only too ready and then all of a sudden having it be at your fingertips and not really being ready. And the other two pieces I'll just put out there are, we talked a lot about the family dynamics between the care partner, the primary care partner, and the person living with dementia. And I've been struck by how much the entire family system comes back to play, the whole family dynamics, the sibling rivalry, who stepped in, who didn't, why me, why not me, and if there's a spot for that in your research and whatnot. And finally, the same thing about the health of the relationship between the care partner initially and the person living with dementia and how it's changed. Like if it was bad, is that also initially a worse outcome or is it a better outcome if they're able to deal with those kinds of things? Thanks.
Well, thank you, Shira. You might need to break those down for me again. But so with respect to the first one, in a way, people dying of any disease, and we're the loving observer to that, we thought we were ready and then the death happens. And even with the most meticulous hospice care, when we know and there's low symptom burden and people are very well cared for, of course, there's that shock and there's the reality. And really, any therapist would tell you that's when grief actually starts. It's when that shock of the death, the last breath, and that dissipates. We do a lot by helping people prepare, by giving them the chance for these goodbyes, and that imaginal conversation is part of it. And, we tell people all the time in hospice and palliative care, treat every day as though it's the last day. When you leave, make sure you say your goodbye, because you just don't know. We actually wrote an article about this called Sudden on Chronic Death, with 2 dementia family caregivers who were looking at a long trajectory, and one person died aspirating a sandwich, and another person fell down the stairs and bled out a brain. So a sudden death can still happen. So that idea of, and frankly, all of us should live that life with people we love, right? Every day should be viewed as, as a goodbye. Very few people live that way. That's a different kind of wisdom. But to prepare people for that, and then to articulate kind of how they want that to be. Now, to get to your family, about your question about the other family, who do you want to be there? Most people do want the whole family there. They like that. Other people pick and choose. If you're a social worker, you've seen plenty of these sibling rivalries. I'm not the favorite, you're the favorite, difficult daughter-in-law. All of these things play out at deathbed. It is nice to have this opportunity, as the support of others come in, that they have a chance to weigh in on how they write this. And in the example of the training, and these are true examples, a family came in together and they got a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they wrote the obituary right in the nursing home and laughed and told stories. And the 2 daughters, who hammer and tongs, I guess it was the bucket of chicken. I don't know. Maybe that was the therapeutic intervention. I don't know. But they're just saying, think about this now. Think about hospice earlier than you might have thought about hospice, because now we add this layer of support, all of those things. But the rivalries are going to bubble up. It's just, or the tension, or mom never loved me, and here you wanting me to show up, and you want me to now, take her to the doctor, whatever these elements are, and she's not even herself. And then the transitions, people who have made it through mid-stage and the behaviors, and we tell people when the terrible behaviors happen, we say, this too will pass. And believe us, you'll actually miss that when you see what comes next, because what comes next is not recognizing you at all. All right. And one of the ways we can do this lovingly, and I'm using the word loving here with intention, is if you're the nursing home social worker or the adult day center social worker or staff member, that you're still engaging with the person in their historic sense. Like, she was a dancer and she loved to dance. And so we make a point that she has music. So we're telling families, we're modeling to families in this therapy as well, your mom's still in there. She's still in there. And, lean into seeing her, even though it's changed. So in imaginal conversation, you're saying to her what your heart's desire is to say to her, even if she can't hear it anymore, even if she can't understand it anymore. And, we can do that with people after a death, but it's very powerful if they can practice that imaginal conversation, take it to bedside while their family member may not hear it, understand it, but now the words are spoken in lifetime. Most people will say the imaginal conversation is the hardest element there. They hate it. They dread it. They know it's coming next week. Oh, I don't want to do it. You go first. No, you go first. But afterwards, they say, that's the day it pivoted for me. That's the day I really felt I could get my head around it. Anyway, did I get those all together? All right. Okay, okay, there we go. Someone has to hop off because they've got their group to do, of course.
Many thanks in the chat here. Kathie, any other questions that are coming up for folks? Kathie, I'll ask, as I heard you talking about all the benefits of ensuring that the care partner is not isolated, not staying isolated, getting connected to community in different ways. And also the challenges that come with that, right? The barriers. I'm the only one who can care for my loved one, uh, um, it's too hard. I'm fine. I don't really need that, right? I loved your example of even having the supportive person in the group come and sort of share their perspective on that. What are some other suggestions or ideas that you've seen help sort of lovingly confront that or help people move through that? Because I think that's a huge challenge.
Well, thanks. And that's a great question. So I think first of all is to not take fine, which as you know is the F word of mental health. Um, Not to take it at face value. And the thing is, as I tried to convey here, so often the caregivers who are at highest risk are the ones we act that on the surface look the most pulled together. They've got it organized. They got the pills figured out. They've got this, they've got that, and the other thing. And their whole world is now confined around this person. And we see this in other forms of caregiving when parents care for disabled children or people build their life around the family member with serious mental illness and they need to manage that, and it's constant. So I think the first thing is for clinicians is to keep their eyes open and identify the risk of people who look like they have it all pulled together.
Yeah.
And they may be our high risk people. And you do that by saying, observing how strongly they identify with the caregiving role and not being able to imagine a life any different than the one they're living now. So those are the two things clinically I'd look for. But these are also people that I can just tell you, you offer them respite and they will not take respite care. You can offer them adult daycare and they will say, and this is true, he's going to hate it. He's not going to want to go. And you know something? He is going to hate it and he's not going to want to go because nobody ever wants to go to. I've never had a client who said, oh, my name came to the top of the nursing home wait list. I get to go. No one ever does that. But just helping people do that in baby steps. So, and I emphasize this with family caregivers because they got their skills in baby steps. Now they know how to keep a person safe in their home, but they didn't know that before. And they learned that in baby steps. And they learned you take the knobs off the stove before you go to bed and you put them in a Cool Whip tub on the top shelf so that, a person can't light the stove in the middle of the night. By the way, that's a really good trick. Anyway, and just talk about baby steps and using, every therapist knows small step approach. What's the smallest change that you could make that you would feel comfortable with? So honestly, bringing in a housekeeper, that's the path to getting a person to accept more services, getting a neighbor to come in. And if the caregiver is not willing to let the neighbor stay alone with the husband, just spend time with them. The three of you now do the jigsaw puzzle. So baby steps, and reinforcing that. And then frankly, strategic guilt mitigation. Because family caregivers are hardwired for guilt, regardless of the disease process, because it never feels like we're doing enough, ever feels like we're doing enough. And just the whole principle of what's good enough and what gets it done. And, we actually teach caregivers to be a little dishonest, right? You would never say to a person in a nursing home who's wandering the hall and saying, where's my wife? You'd never go up to that person and say, well, George, your wife died 3 years ago. Why make their grief start all over again? You would distract that person with, well, you look a little lonely. Let's go for a walk together. You would do that, right? And, that's kind of dishonest if you think about it, but it's actually a deeper honesty. And so we teach those tricks And we use those tricks because social workers, as you know, are among the most manipulative professionals in the world. And it's actually a point of pride. But I will say you could sit down with these high-risk caregivers and do this one-on-one and never get anywhere. But the group holds them accountable and challenges them and says, you know, that was really hard for me too. And this is how I talked with my daughters. And they told me, Dad, it's time for hospice. And I didn't want to hear it. And that was 4 months ago. And it was the best decision I ever made. So Chuck, I'm telling you, listen to your daughters. And that can happen in a group. And that message is much more powerful than the best therapist giving the same advice. So group is powerful. Yalom was right.
Yeah. Yeah. That universality and hearing from other people and knowing that you're with people who have similar experiences. Yeah.
And just kind of the last thought, you know, we talked about the loving, devoted caregiver as high risk, but the person who had the fraught relationship and now the person is not able to talk anymore, not able to apologize anymore, and then dies, you know, that's a long burden to carry too. Because then it's hard to grieve the beautiful thing you lost, and it's hard to grieve what you never got that you should have gotten, and you'll never have a chance. So those are the extremes of it. And in the middle are the people who cope best are the people who said, really sucked, but I did it. You know, those are the people, and isn't that wisdom for our times?
Thank you so much. We do have time for another question or so. My colleague Rochelle is going to put a link in the chat for CEUs. For those of you who are interested in CEUs, and actually for everybody, let me say this, for everybody, please do fill out our survey, whether you need a CEU or not. This is really helpful information for us, for our Hearst Foundation grant funders. So please do fill out the survey and we can give CEUs to New York licensed social workers, and we're happy to give certificates of participation to any other profession as well. So please do get a certificate and let us know, give us feedback on this workshop tonight. Yes, any additional thoughts or questions? Again, a lot of gratitude coming to you, Kathie, in the chat today. Anything? Kathie, any last words or thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I think I've commented a lot about even when people welcome the burden of caregiving and see it as part of their relationship, it's a heavy lift. I will point out for all of you that caring for dementia caregivers itself is a heavy lift. And so I commend you for the work you do. You will never see the benefits of this support that people carry long after the death of the person living with dementia. But if people can leave that experience feeling supported and listened to and cared for by those of you on this call, that's a good life's work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, so much appreciation and kudos for all the social workers out there. It is also Creative Arts Therapy Month, which I am a licensed creative arts therapist, as are some of my colleagues. So happy Creative Arts Therapies Month as well. You're using some psychodramatic techniques in your workshops, so which is very exciting. I love that your grief workshop pulls from so many different modalities and disciplines and practices. That's so rich. Well, again, thank you. We can stay on another minute if there are any questions, but we're so grateful that you came today. we have education programs for family caregivers. We have support groups at CaringKind that do many of the things that you talked about, those 4 pillars. Kathie, I was really proud of the work CaringKind is doing when I heard that, because I said, oh yes, we have those elements in there. So please stay connected with us. Thank you so much. And Kathie, again, another virtual round of applause for you. Thank you so much. This was so informative, and just it gives, you know, another layer of hope and real like strategy to a real significant problem that as you said in the research, you know, goes under recognized. And so thank you so much for pioneering this work and showing us
Thank
the
you,
way.
everyone. Good night.